Everyone, we're just going to give it a couple more minutes, and then we'll jump into the presentation. But thank you all for joining. Gabriel, let me know when it feels like the waiting room starts to thin out a bit.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Um, okay. There's a couple of people that are asking for the link, so I'm just gonna see about 1 second. Okay, it looks like it's slowed down, so we can go ahead and get started.
Sounds great. Thanks, Amber. Well, thank you all for joining. This is a webinar that we're really excited about here at Wave and our partners. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Nick Matuszewski, and I am the Director of Policy and Program at Wave Educational Fund. And through that role, I lead the Wisconsin Gun Violence Prevention Coalition. And more salient for today, I also co-lead the Wisconsin Community Violence Intervention Coalition. So we are really lucky to have some amazing experts on this call with us today who can kind of explain what CVI is and the impact that it has and kind of the landscape nationally and in Wisconsin. And I'll introduce them just in a second, but I do want to, just as a personal note, say that in my time working in the gun violence prevention space, I don't think there's a single area of the movement that I'm more excited about and more passionate about than community violence intervention. So really appreciate you all joining to learn a little bit more about this movement and ways that you all can hopefully engage and help out with CVI in Wisconsin. So I'll introduce some of the other folks who are going to be speaking during the call. The true experts, thankfully, you don't have to listen to me the entire time. So we're joined today by Mariah Cooley, who is the Midwest Advocacy Associate for Community Justice Action Fund, and also a board member for March for Our Lives. We're joined by Reggie Moore, who's a legend in this space, and he's the Director of Community Safety Policy and Engagement at the Medical College of Wisconsin. We're also joined by Jessica Butler, who's the Program Operations Manager for 414 Life. And lastly, we are joined by Anthony Cooper Sr., who is the CEO, President, and founder of Focused Interruption. Next slide, please, Amber. So just a little quick overview of what you can expect out of this call. It's going to run about an hour. Hopefully we'll wrap up a little bit early before 2, have some time for questions. But the goal of the presentation is really kind of an introduction to CVI. So we're going to be answering questions like, what is CVI? What is community violence intervention? What's the national landscape around CVI? Where has this policy been implemented? What have some of the effects been? And then we're going to pull it back and look at what the landscape is in Wisconsin, including a little bit of a discussion around the Wisconsin Community Violence Intervention Coalition and some of the great work that the coalition and the members of the coalition are doing. And then we will move into a discussion around how folks can get involved, some different calls to action to push for this important policy. And then lastly, we'll move into a question and answer segment. So if you have any questions, please feel free to hold on to them until then. But if you prefer to put them in the chat throughout the presentation, we can start compiling some of those too. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Reggie Moore, who will talk to us a little bit about what CVI is and the national landscape around it.
Oh, thank you, Nick. Great to be with all of you. I'm not the only legend on the call. I definitely see other colleagues and comrades. Good to see Mr. Mosley and David Muhammad, who was my partner in PISA at the City of Milwaukee's Office of Violence Prevention and is doing amazing work in the county. So I'm not coming at this and speaking on this webinar as an expert. I'm speaking on it as I will call a practitioner. I'm constantly learning, and we'll just be sharing with you in terms of perspectives, not just from Wisconsin, but also nationally. This particular slide, when we talk about CVI, this is specifically from the action plan around CVI, which is a national effort to really look at one, what are the gaps and needs of expanding the capacity and sustaining CVI work around the country. And so they have engaged frontline and leaders of CVI work around the country. And in defining CVI, this is the sort of prevailing definition of community violence intervention being an approach that uses evidence-informed strategies to reduce near-term violence through tailored community-centered initiatives. And understanding that these are multidisciplinary approaches, that it's not one program or one system, that it really is around a sort of collective approach that should be centering and driven by the community. And so I'll highlight some of the examples that you would typically see in a CVI ecosystem around the country in the next slide. Next slide, please. So this particular graphic is from the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. And so it really just kind of breaks down the difference between sort of prevention, intervention, and community transformation. In the public health space, we talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Primary being sort of what should every person in the population have access to, whether that be social emotional learning. When you think about seatbelt laws, for example, those are things in terms of on primary prevention are things that can reduce the likelihood of harm. Intervention is where there's a level of risk that requires some level of engagement to try to mitigate that risk and prevent either future harm. And Beth, you may be unmuted if you want to mute. And then community transformation is this basically is laying out in terms of the type of work that what we would call in terms of systemic and structural. And even when we developed a blueprint for peace in Milwaukee, we understand factors around structural historic racism, systemic violence, poverty, all of the contributing risk factors that can perpetuate the likelihood of interpersonal violence occurring. But understanding that there are things that we can do right now on the intervention stage that can have outcomes within 1 to 3 years around reducing the likelihood of harm. So this sort of middle section is where a lot of CVI programs operate, and they contribute to community transformation and power building if they're done right. And then also obviously contribute to prevention, especially programs that do work in schools and with young people in neighborhoods and community. And one of the things that Milwaukee County speaks about a lot is, number one, overall door, and that young people should not have to get in trouble to get the help that they need. And that's something that when we think about what it really means to have a continuum of prevention is really critical. And so, however, we understand that we're all under not just pressure, but we all have a commitment to try to mitigate gun violence right now. And so CVI really is focused on the populations that are at greatest risk of either perpetrating or being victimized by gun violence specifically. Next slide. So this particular graphic is from the health, and I'm intentionally using graphics from different organizations. So for those of you who aren't familiar with these organizations, definitely want to encourage you to check out the websites. This is from the HAVI, the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention. And this particular graphic is on the cviecosystem.org website. And so for those of you who are representing cities across the state, you can actually plug in your community. And based on the population and level of violence, it'll actually produce what amount of investment should be being made in your CVI efforts, and then the types of interventions that you could pursue. But typically in a CVI ecosystem, these are the types of programming and infrastructure that you will see. So crisis management systems, which New York, I think, has one of the longest standing and most comprehensive ones that, again, spans the continuum of primary, secondary, and tertiary, which instead of tertiary, I like to use the word healing, in terms of understanding that before crisis, during a crisis, and after a crisis, what are all of the supports that a community needs? And then gun violence reduction strategies, which sometimes can involve focused deterrence or sort of the call-in model where you're providing both enforcement or accountability for those who may have a history of perpetrating violence. But most importantly, there should also be that balance of supports and saying these are the services and opportunities because, we don't want to see anyone end up in a coffin or a cage or a courtroom as a result of continuing to engage in gun violence. But really focus on those who, the small part of the population that is often attributed to a lot of the gun violence in the community. Targeted trauma-informed care, so whether that's trauma response services for young people or those who have witnessed or been exposed to violence, pre-intervention, which you will hear about from Jessica around 4 for Life, but also focused interruption, and there are other programs across the state that are growing and beginning to implement street intervention and outreach programming. Peace fellowships, which an example of that would be Advanced Peace. And Milwaukee County just allocated funding to launch that program this year. And so that's a Peace Fellowship is an example of that, is where individuals, again, who are maybe at risk of committing or becoming victimized by violence, really engaging in a cohort over a period of time where they're getting supports, life skills support, life coaching support, cognitive behavior theory, where it really is about not just mediating conflict in their life, but also changing mindsets. And so that's an example of a Peace Fellowship. And then hospital-based violence intervention, which Project Ujima has been one of the longest standing ones in Wisconsin. Focused interruption is also through funding with the Wisconsin Community Safety Fund, engaging in hospital-based response. And then Forum for Life also has a hospital response component, which involves responding to gunshot survivors and their families in hospitals to prevent retaliation and also support their healing and recovery. Next slide. This slide, again, is taken from the CVI action team. And what this shows, and I think naturally when I looked at this map, I was focused on the blue states. Don't focus on the blue states. Those are the states that there's not a significant amount of at least data indicating that there's CVI activity, but the states that are not blue are where at least there's data to support that there's CVI programming happening or investment, and whether that's from the federal level, ARPA funding, or at the local level. And then I'll give you examples on the next slide of what some of those programs look like in each state by region. So basically this is the Midwest, West, Southeast, and Northeast. And you can kind of see the red dots there's an Office of Violence Prevention, Community Safety, or Office of Neighborhood Engagement. The purple indicates a gun violence reduction strategy. The yellow is group violence intervention. Turquoise is street outreach. The light green is violence interruption. The green is Peace Fellowships. And then I believe that's black or extreme navy blue, hospital-based violence intervention programs. And so, and as with a lot of these national, whether they be indexes or mapping or whatever, there's often omission. And so even for Wisconsin, as we know that there's programming outside of Milwaukee that is doing this work that may not have been captured in their analysis, but this at least gives you a snapshot. And I would say these regions are where these programs are, or these kind of strategies are most concentrated. And there's a growing effort in the South, particularly in Texas and Houston in particular, where there's a growing movement in terms of standing up CVI programming. Next slide.
Yes. So thank you so much for that, Reggie. That was absolutely amazing. I just wanted to give everyone some context to the coalition that was able to help put this together. I co-lead it with Nick, and we are a group of activists, CVI practitioners, law enforcement, and folks who are really passionate about ending everyday gun violence in Wisconsin. We've been able to push for impactful work such as the need for CVI funding and sustaining that funding, which we'll get into more later, but also the opportunity to work with offices of violence prevention in cities such as Green Bay and Racine, and also having great connections with those in Madison and Milwaukee. I want to just give a quick shout out to some of the groups that are a part of the coalition, such as the Hobby, Medical College of Wisconsin, Moms Demand, the OVPs in Racine and Green Bay, the Office of Community Safety and Wellness in Milwaukee, Brady, Giffords, and March for Our Lives. And also, just as a shameless plug, if you all are interested in joining the coalition, please do not hesitate to email Nick and I so we can loop you into those meetings and so we can continue to advocate together. With that, I will now pass it on to our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Mariah. Thanks for going through the awesome work that the coalition does. And now we're actually going to hear from a couple different coalition members and CVI practitioners that are doing amazing work in their respective communities. And first up is Jessica Butler from 414 Life. So Amber, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I am going to give us a quick overview of the work we do here at 414 Life. And so our program is predicated on using a public health approach to breaking the cycle of gun violence in Milwaukee. And if you can go to the next slide, it'll go to the overview of the program. And so 414 Life, we have three main components to our work of our team. So we have outreach workers, violence interrupters, and hospital responders. And so the primary goal of our program is to work to reduce retaliatory gun violence in the community. With our street outreach team and the work that they do, their primary focus is within two geographic focus areas in Milwaukee, one being Old North Milwaukee, and the other being Walker's Point. And so Old North Milwaukee was identified as one of our main places for our implementation for the program early on in 2018, because it was one of the areas in the city with the highest rates of gun violence, both homicides and non-fatal shootings. And so it has continuously been one of the leading neighborhoods in the city, so which is why it has remained our geographic focus area. And on the south side, Walker's Point is a neighborhood that also has a high rates of gun violence within that side of town. So we wanted to make sure there were 2 points of touching for our street outreach interventions. And so our outreach team, they, outside of doing canvassing efforts and doing community events, they also work with individuals to work with on behavior change and those folks who are at greatest risk for being a shot or being a shooter. And so they, that team also working within schools, within local high schools and middle schools, presenting curriculum on gun violence reduction strategies, conflict resolutions, healthy relationships, and much more. And that same curriculum is also used within our Bell Phillips detention centers with youth that are in detention center. And so with that participant engagement, we work with 15 to 35-year-olds, and a lot of our younger people that we work with are justice impacted, and a lot of them also come from community referrals. So our team can get referrals from community, from system partners, families as well. And then our violence interrupters, their primary function is to do conflict de-escalation mediation within community, and they work with a lot of community-based referrals. So folks can call our team for any conflict that has potential to turn into gun violence, which is almost any conflict within our community. And they also receive a lot of referrals from our Office of Community Wellness and Safety, which was formerly our OVP. And those referrals are directly related to have a high case of mediation, retaliatory violence, and so they mediate those conflicts as well. Our hospital responders work directly at the hospital level within Freighter and now Ascension, Wisconsin, with an upcoming expansion into Aurora Sinai next month. And so at the hospital level, they also act as violence interrupters to help support gun violence victims and their families, and they help connect them to resources. They help to just provide more grief support in some of those times. So it's really challenging in the aftermath of getting shot. So they're right there providing that support right hands on. And so one of the things that is we love to talk about within our program is how all three parts work together, especially at the point of injury at the hospital level. And so when victims are referred to our program at the hospital level, once they are stabilized, our team can assess for retaliation and safety, and then they can also refer them out based on what they need to our outreach or violence interruption team. And so if there's a high risk for retaliatory violence, the hospital responders will then refer patients to our violence interrupters to mediate conflict in community. And then if they have ongoing needs or case management needs, then they can be referred to our outreach workers for ongoing support. And so all patients or participants that we work with can work with us as long as they need to. We do have most participants on our caseloads for at least 6 months and provide support to them. And a lot of that support comes through housing, again, mediation services, food access, mental health supports. And so we work with a lot of providers within the community to help connect participants and patients to those ongoing supports. And we follow that journey until they're completely stabilized. And the overall goal is to, especially for folks who are involved in street related activities, for them not to recidivate. And so there's a lot of work that goes hand in hand with that. And so all parts of our program are constantly in communication, constantly working together to support victims and their families and their community at large. And so that is a quick and dirty for 414 Life.
Thank you, Jessica. It's really great to hear some of the awesome work that y'all are doing in Milwaukee. And just as the work going on in Milwaukee has been transformational and super impactful, we are really lucky to be joined by Anthony Cooper, who is leading similar efforts in the Dane County area. So Coop, I'll pass it to you. Oh, Coop, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Hello, everyone, Anthony Cooper. You mind going to the next slide, please? Yep. So basically who we are, and just to kind of, I know everyone is able to see what's on the screen. We're basically an organization who we saw some things happen in our community, just to kind of give you, again, kind of a quick snapshot of who we are and what we do and how we've been kind of navigating it in the Dane County area. We're basically individuals we saw some things going on in our community, and for the most part, these are people who we're connected with in one way or another. Most of my staff have lived experience in one way or another, whether it was with violent crimes or being able to just navigate different things throughout the community. Some of us have been in prison, some of us not. But at the end of the day, it was about, we wanted something different for our community. We wanted to be able to make sure with individuals who have strong ties to be able to say, okay, enough is enough. Can you go to the next slide, please? When we talk about some of not only just the gun violence and the increase in gun violence that has happened in our community, especially around COVID, from shots fired, we talk about the impact and things of that nature that many of us already know and see what it looks like. But I think in Madison, to be honest, I really felt like Madison has always been in this small kind of bubble. And the more and more that where shootings started to happen in our community, we had to be able to navigate it differently, and being able to really start talking about not only the disparities, but then also talk about the real true challenges that are happening. We're talking about homelessness, joblessness, and so forth. Next slide, please. So in our community, one of the impacts when we talk about just some of the stuff, I feel like Reggie kind of went over, but I'll go ahead and just still kind of touch on some of it. I was called Reggie, he's the mastermind of it all, I feel like. But at the same time, when we talk about healthcare in our community, the criminal justice system, and then also being able to allow, when we talk about the police and emergency responders and all the costs that are happening, and also the trauma that is happening throughout our community. I think that where we've really been able to not only work with individuals on the street level, but then also being able to connect with individuals in our schools also, and being able to reach out to different organizations that sometimes either felt like they did not necessarily have a say in what was going on, or even felt as though that they were connected. Can I go to the next slide, please? So one of the things as far as with our programming, for the most part, we do have 5 areas of programming. Our BOW programming is that stands for Brothers Against Odds. Our LOT program is Leaders of Tomorrow, and then our community safety workers and our outreach team, and also our aftercare and recovery. Our BOW program, for the most part, are working with a subset of young men who some of them are between 14 to about from 13 to 18. For the most part, I kind of helping them just look at things differently, and then also being able to expose them to other things throughout our community. That means as far as building different relationships with other community partners, talking about employment, being able to really show them that it's possible for them to be able to do something different with their lives from some of the choices that they've been involved in. Our LOT program is Leaders of Tomorrow, where for the most part, we're inside of our school. Currently, we're in La Follette High School, as well as Black Hawk Elementary School, that we're really doing team involvements, also being able to sit down and do groups, and being able to give them that additional exposure, but then also being able to talk about how they have also been impacted around violence, but still at the same, more importantly, being able to take them out of their communities and to be able to expose them to other things throughout our community, but then also other communities throughout Wisconsin. We've been able to also support some of our kids, as well as being able to go to the Black Student Union field trip for the ones who are interested in going to college, and even if they feel like college is not accessible to them, to being able to talk about what those approaches and what are the need for those approaches to make sure that they can be a part of it. Excuse me, to make sure that it's attainable for their lives. Our community safety workers, they work on all high-risk violent crimes throughout our community. So that means that any gun violence that may happen throughout our community, they also go to the hospitals as well as on the scene of the violence that has happened, and being able to meet people where they're at, and also being able to help them navigate what are some of the additional things that they may need. But then also we do one of I think the blessings around, especially with our community safety workers, when we're able to step in to be able to prevent things, retaliatory violence, but also being able to prevent things from happening. We have family members who are calling us from the community. There's been a lot of times where law enforcement has not been involved. We've been able to actually sit down and navigate situations among neighbors. And some things, we wish we had the magic wand to being able to fix it all, as we probably all do. But I think the thing that what most people have said to us as an organization is the fact that, one, that we were there when they felt like no one else was, in these very critical moments. And then also with our community safety workers, also one of the other response techniques is to be able to talk about, when we talk about trauma and trauma that's stacked on top of trauma. A lot of those things happen when people are coming to the hospital and not necessarily knowing how to navigate those systems, but then also the systems that when they have lost a loved one and don't know what's the next step, and what do we do and how do we do it. We also provide relocation costs, as well as being able to help with funeral costs, as well as therapy, and connecting the dots for those individuals who have been connected with our community. outreach workers. Our community safety workers pretty much work on all lower risk type of challenges that are happening in our community. Currently, we're in 4 of the communities in town here, and really being able to connect with law enforcement. Instead of someone getting a ticket, we're able to ask the officer not to give them the ticket, or the fact that they utilize us as a connecting point. So if a young man just stole, I'll use something simple, is stealing a candy bar, and we really kind of a candy bar from Walgreens, and we kind of navigate that whole situation instead of them getting a $300 to $400 ticket, which is only going to add more challenges for that family. Being able to help them navigate that, and then also look at what are some of the other challenges so far, which has been a blessing for us as well. Most people will sit down and talk with us, and also without police involvement, without someone eventually from getting a ticket, or even potentially even going to jail. One of the other things as far as our aftercare and recovery is the fact that and this is on, it's kind of like another, I don't want to call it a Band-Aid, but a way of being able to bring all things together. Whether if they're responding, if something happened where they have to go to the hospital, where we follow them for the most part, from the hospital once they leave and feel like things are okay. But then at the same time, making sure that we're connecting the dots long term for them as well. And that's with either if it's a therapist, if that's with being able, because even getting someone, for those that who don't know that may be a part of this webinar today, is the fact that everyone's not always open to go and see a therapist. Those things takes time. And so in being able to walk that process with them, but then also look at some of the other things of what are some of the other challenges that they may be having in their life, and some things that we're able to navigate with them through our agency. But if not through our agency, we act as the connecting point from our agency with other agencies throughout our community. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. If you don't mind going back one more time for me, please. Yeah. So one of the other things I did want to make sure I added, as far as, and this is just a way of being able to make sure, because there's no cookie cutter way of approaching gun violence just as a whole. So it was really important to make sure that we have certified crisis prevention. Well, me myself, I'm actually crisis prevention instructor, but then also making sure that our team is certified nonviolent crisis interventionist, certified peer specialists. We have a few of those on our team, also certified recovery coaches, and also certified reentry coaches as well, just to be able to add value. And I wanted to make sure our team understands that value, but then also the people who we're connecting to throughout our community, also to make sure that they understand that value as well. Can you please go to the next slide? So this just kind of just talks about, we established in 2016. We were able to partner actually with my other hat that we're in the community with Reentry. They were our fiscal agent from 2016 until almost about a year ago. So now, once we actually established ourselves as our own 501c3, but has been able to partner again with different agencies, and really being able to show that the fact that us together is the only true way of being able to prevent gun violence that's happening in our community, but also being able to really service our community in a way that is going to get people from one step, and being able to utilize it, even our churches and things of that nature, to being able to have a greater conversations from there. Can you go to the next slide, please? Again, this is just kind of just going into with our BOW program, and kind of giving just a quick snapshot of this. Was it may sound very simple. It was something that that most people don't necessarily always look at. Taking these young men to a basketball game at the university here, that again really gave them just a different aspect. And so now they're talking about college. Now they got a chance to meet engineers and doctors, and again really giving them a different way of being able to look at life. Next slide, please. So just really going back into what we kind of just talked about a little bit earlier, as far as like for my Leaders of Tomorrow program. Again, one of the other great things about this program is like even from with our tutoring and being able to, again, with our tutoring, and we have some folks that who have volunteered with us that who are actually therapists that who are having additional conversations with them, but not, not necessarily in its totality from a therapist lens, but being able to talk about what are the things that are important and being able to help and navigate that conversation, and also us bringing their parents and making sure that they're involved in those conversations as well, because that's another thing that what we talk about quite a bit, which we're referring to generational trauma, because those things are happening in our schools as well. Go to the next slide, please. I'll be wrapping up real quick here. Community safety workers, again, just kind of really going into that work. Can you go to the next slide, please? The same thing. So also, just because if I didn't mention it, as far as we've been able to place people in jobs as well. Many people also know me from some of the other work that I've done as far as being a job developer, and as well as being able to knock on doors and being able to connect spaces for men and women who have need employment in our community. Next slide, please. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Again, just kind of going over our numbers. These actually came from Coach Drive, was able to help and support, again, young men that didn't think that their voice or that they can actually connect with the community. That's something that, again, being able to change the narrative is very important for us as an organization. Next slide, please. And I'll go, if you don't mind, going to the next slide after that. Again, these are just some of our current partners. As well, we're always willing to definitely work with other partners throughout the community and look at ways on being able to definitely enhance the work that what we're doing. Next slide, please. And there's, again, just kind of just, if there are anyone that who is on this call here, would love to still talk about ways of how we can kind of partner in going forward. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing all that, Coop. That's awesome. And I know we skipped through some slides, but we will.
Yeah, I was trying to.
No, you're good. I was going to say that we will be sending the PowerPoint out to folks so they can read anything that we might have missed. But that is awesome, and really appreciate all the work that you're doing in Madison. We'll toss it back to Mariah to walk through a couple different ways that folks on the call can get involved in CVI work and advocacy. Yeah.
So firstly, thank you to all the speakers. Thank you for the tireless work that you do. Sometimes you'll be often seen as a thankless job, so thank you. Yes, just thank you a million times. So when it comes to a call to action for everybody listening, one thing that you're able to do is contact your congressman or congresswoman about HR 5003 and S2638, which is the Break the Cycle of Violence Act. And so the issue is, without funding, we wouldn't be able to continue this work. These groups won't be able to continue the work that they do. And so what this bill would do is invest $6.5 billion over the next 8 years to community-based violence prevention programs, and as well as youth workforce development programs in areas with high rates of gun violence. So one thing that you can do is contact your legislator about this bill, and then also send a letter to the editor to your local newspaper. So we're expanding not only the knowledge of CVI, but encouraging the folks who read the letter to the editors to also get mobilized as well.
And then just to add on to that, one of the unfortunate parts about, CVI in Wisconsin is that although there's amazing work being done, a lot of groups are at risk of losing funding or not being able to go on much longer unless the state can provide some funding for that. So one of the big pushes that we're going to do at Wave, and I know other partners in the coalition will be working on this as well, is that come budget season, it's going to be a top priority for us to attend hearings and write to statewide elected officials to ask to have CVI in the budget. So whatever that might look like. So just be on the lookout for emails from Wave or Moms Demand Action or others to try to get involved in that in any way you can. And there are a few links in the chat that Heidi Johnson from Wave has been putting in there. So if you're looking for other ways to go about doing this, that will be helpful. Next slide, Amber. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. We're going to open it up for Q&A for the next 10 minutes or so. If you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask it or raise your hand, and we can call on you.
So Nick, since no one has questions for us, can I ask questions of the group?
That would be great. Yeah.
All right, cool. So I just want to shout out my colleague, Ann McCullough, who is leading the statewide community safety work for Wisconsin on behalf of MCW, which basically is seeded by ARPA funding from Governor Evers, which we all know, and whether at the local, state, or county level, that ARPA funding will be running out in 26. I guess for groups that are kind of new to CVI, or whether you've been doing it or not, what would you like to see? And is funding an issue or not? And also, if you're not plugged into kind of the national movement, what would be helpful for you to get plugged in? And there's multiple people on this call that can, help do that. I'm just curious for folks that may not be in this work every day, but are interested in doing more.
And if folks would prefer to, sorry. Oh, cool. Sorry. Go ahead.
No. Well, I guess I was just going to just ask as far as if there are different ways of being able to get plugged in more, especially also with the national aspect of things. Because I think there's a lot of us who definitely want to make sure that we're having those connections also, because we also look at what's happening. Madison is very unique, right? We're not as big as Milwaukee, and you all are doing phenomenal work in Milwaukee. But then I think with Madison, it's kind of like sometimes people feel like, oh, nothing's really happening there, right? Until the next thing we have, there's 50 people who have just got shot during the weekend or whatever the case may be. Madison is not a Chicago, but at the same time, things can happen, and we're trying to do a lot of preventive work and trying to look at other ways and strategies to be able to do other prevention work for our community. I'd say Madison, but I mean everyone that's around in the community as well, Sun Prairie and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Jerry, I see your hand is raised. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So I know being in working in nonprofit that oftentimes we hold ourselves accountable and present our work as meeting various metrics, but it seems like in this work, some of the most important results aren't recorded like that. And I'm wondering, Anthony and Jessica in particular, are there stories from people you've interacted with that continue to motivate you and continue to bring people into CVI work?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of your question again?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the stories you're hearing from the people who you have worked with over the years, how that those stories probably are motivating you and motivating the people who are observing your work in this field.
So with our team, like there are always like a lot of success stories, a lot of challenges, and so one of the things that that comes immediate to mind is when we work with victims who oftentimes experience a need for housing, which is probably the number one thing outside of like safety and retaliation in the aftermath of a shooting. Folks need to get relocated, and being able to successfully help them find permanent stable housing is one of the things that kind of keeps folks going. And so we at Forum for like we're super fortunate to have partners within like Milwaukee County, and other neighborhood, other community supports that can help bridge that gap, especially help cover some of the financial aspects of it. And those type of success stories lets us know like collaboration works. And we get to see that on a very routine basis. And so I know recently a report was shared from I think last year where the new housing support specifically for folks who have been impacted by gun violence from Milwaukee County was shared. They were able to move, I think like 40 something individuals on with only $13,000. And then this year, like seeing other agencies being able to invest in that. So we've been able to do some cross funding to help for longer term stability. And so most recently, we had a family who was displaced due to gun violence, and with Milwaukee County supporting, West Care, Wisconsin supporting, that family got like almost 6 months of breathing room to get stabilized. And those type of things are important when we're talking around when folks are fleeing violence. And we have to keep that at the forefront that more investment in housing resources is needed in that way for longer term stability because folks have physical things and so many other things that come up when they're shot. And that continued support helps them. And so when we talk about advocacy, that's a huge point of advocacy that is needed, but it also keeps us going. And those are good wins. They're not always quick, but they're really good wins, and it helps us keep things in perspective about why we do what we do.
Yeah, and I can't do nothing but really echo that. One of the things, but one of the downsides for especially in Madison, we've been able to definitely place people in housing, but housing in the Dane County is scarce, right? And extremely high. I mean, there's been reports and things of that nature about it. But also when we're able to partner with different agencies and being able to navigate what that actually looks like and what that additional support can look like for individuals, that means as far as stable housing, but then also being able to stable family placement, which is sometimes it's kind of hard to do, where some folks may look at, all right, well, one person, we only have a 1 bedroom, or we can only be in a hotel for so long. But at the same time, when you have a whole family that's sitting in a hotel room for, a month or 2 months, that becomes traumatic as well. So being able to really navigate those things, that's what keeps us going. That's what keeps us and having real wins behind it. But then also, again, more than anything, I think really showing people that it's possible and that we're not going to give up. And so we beg and plead for them not to give up and keep being able to reach out to partners, reach out and also looking outside the box. I probably say this more than many. There's not a cookie cutter way of how to approach things when it's coming to when you're dealing with trauma, when you're dealing with generational trauma, when you're dealing with trying to navigate stuff through the school systems and so on and so forth, because all of this stuff is connected in one way or another. And even though in some spaces they may see it as being separate, but we have to pull in the partners to make sure that those things are being addressed. And then so where for some may look at, hey, this is a challenge, but and this is something that we say in our office, challenges are meant to be overcome, right? And the more that we do that together, that's how we get to that extra point. Having relationship with the hospital and the hospitals has been significant too, because again, and being able to really provide that additional support and also provide the support without strings being attached. That's a whole nother thing as well that has been a huge encouragement for people, because sometimes you're not able to see that.
Cool. And Jessica, thank you so much for your answers. And Jerry, thanks for asking that question. Rose, do you have a question?
Yes, I know that WAVE deals primarily with gun violence, but I'm wondering if there's any intersection with the vehicular violence that we're experiencing, especially in Milwaukee right now.
I'd be curious to toss that again to some of the folks on the call and Coop or Jessica. Is that something that you're focused on at all?
I was going to ask you to repeat that, please. I'm sorry, Jessica, if you repeat that, please.
Are you speaking to me?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Okay. We are having so many stolen cars and running from police and vehicular traffic homicides. And I'm wondering, I know that WAVE deals primarily with gun violence, but I'm wondering if in your interacting with the young people, older people who are committing these crimes, is there any kind of an intersection between the violence that's happening on our streets and the violence that's happening with the guns?
I think here in Milwaukee, there obviously is a nexus between the two. And so one of the things that we do, especially with young people, we get a lot of referrals through the Milwaukee County for work with young people. And so some of the young people may have like firearm offenses primarily, but a lot of them are often like firearm offenses while found in a stolen car, things like that. And so those are opportunities for intervention at that point. And it does come up with the adults that we work with. It's not as much as that, but I think when you talk about the car crashes and high-speed chases and reckless driving, in Milwaukee, that's not something that's just unique to young people here. Like adults are engaging in that as well. And so we try to, support them from that because we know that oftentimes that one could lead to others. Like it may start out as like we're just selling cars, reckless driving, and then next you're involved in the shooting. And so if a young person is picked up at DT and they get referred to Credible Messenger program and they're outsourced to any one of the 5 agencies or referred to any one of the 5 agencies for that, that is an opportunity to prevent them from engaging in further community violence, which a lot of our young people are sometimes already engaged in when they're doing those types of activities. So we try to use it as hopefully a stopping point. And so for that behavior. But I think David may can also speak to some of this because he may have more insight on it from Milwaukee County level at least.
I think, and I can't really speak much as far as Milwaukee, but in Madison, for the most part, what we've actually done is we actually got connected with some of the young the kids who have stole some of the cars through our community, and being able to sit down and talk with them and being able to say, all right, what is it that you really want, and being able to utilize in other partnerships and being able to have those conversations. Because some may say, look, I'm really homeless. This is what's going on. I need this car to be able to live in, right? Some may say, this is what, right now, it started off as a joyride or something I did with friends. And then, I'm in a situation. And so we have relationships with our juvenile justice court as well as detention center here. And so we're able to navigate those conversations with the hope of getting their parents involved. We don't have too many adults. We see more joyriding and things of that nature, not too many crashes that happen, but they have happened in the past, but it hasn't been as high as in the Milwaukee area. So thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Rose. I'll also just say, just on top of that, community violence intervention is focused on kind of addressing the root causes of violence. So whether it's gun violence or any other form of violence, a lot of that work is going to be kind of overlapping for sure. So, the same circumstances that might cause somebody to commit gun violence are also the same circumstances that might cause them to commit other forms of violence. So definitely trying to address that at the root level.
And oftentimes guns are found in the cars.
That's true. That's very true. I think we have time for one last question. James, do you have a question?
Am I still, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Anthony mentioned a term that I found very helpful. It was the lived experience staff. And that's very important to have. My question has to do with the community people that you, not just yourself, but in terms of working with lived experience people. Of course, there's the individual level. We described that in this conversation. Then is there also a way where you have lived experience groups and people that you also manage and maintain and sustain? The lived experience people that have been a part of the problem at one time, but now are moving over to the solution side. So these lived experience people, what are ways that you engage them in supporting your efforts?
I love your question. One of the things that for our organization, we find a lot of different ways. One, being able to just connect with people throughout the community, but then also once people are tied into what we are doing, we also provide additional support, right? So I think that being able to connect and being able to talk about traumas and being able to talk about what does healing mean for you before you even work with individuals throughout the community makes sense, right? Because how can you trying to think of the best way of saying it, but I'll just say it how I feel it, is the fact that where you want to be able to heal or help individuals, but yet you're still dealing with your own things as well. And so we found different ways of being able to navigate those pieces and being able to say, whether if that's having a therapist, whether if it's groups that is actually happening. We even utilize one of our groups that with Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership. We have a Man Up group that I ended up helping out with 11 or so years ago, and have a team that's there as well. So being able to provide what does support look like, but knowing that the people who we're working with, the people who work with us also need that additional support. A lot of times that where some of the folks they may be the best credible messenger, but then at the same time, it's not getting the support that they need for themselves to be able to breathe effectively. Right. And so, and that's again, when we talk about the continuum of care, not only for the individuals who we're serving, but then also for our team.
Now that continuum of care, when there's been an opportunity to enable that person to move through their traumatic experience, whatever it may be, or moving through or after incarceration, and may want to support and help the organization because of the harm they've inflicted on others.
Yes, sir.
That learned experience person, are there any mentoring type programs or role modeling programs, people who do presentations that have been through all of that and say, be it in schools, be it with adult groups or whatever, how do you make use of your experience, your learned experienced person who's been through the horrific experience of gun violence?
Yeah. So actually, in our organization, we have people who are doing that currently. But even also because our community is so small, we're very careful about that as well. Depending on how that person is connected through our community. But we do presentations inside of the schools, the university, as well as in forums similar to this as well.
Okay, so there is a kind of a cautionary note with this, dependent upon being knowledgeable about the community where they came from, their own reputation.
Yes, sir.
Their sense of shame sometimes that's with that, and overcoming those kind of things. So I can see what you're saying, that there is some necessary guidance that is necessary in working with those individuals. Have you had then, second part question, now the kind of an achieve, you got to go, right?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I know a lot of people have to jump off. We're happy to stay on longer, but I'm just going to go to the last slide. And then if folks want to stay on for more questions, we can. But just for everyone that, so here's a slide of resources. When we send out the PowerPoint, you can click on these. And there are so many great websites and resources, if you're trying to get more involved with CVI or learn about that. And then the last slide, please, Amber. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining. Here are the emails for myself and Mariah. If you have any questions, again, if you want to stay behind for questions, feel free. But absolutely, just want to thank you all, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks for having us. Y'all take care.
Thank you for having us there.
Take care.
Thank you. Sorry, James, if you wanted to continue your question now, I just wanted to make sure that folks who had to jump off could.
Yeah.
I think, when we talk about, when you look at even in AODA and other programs like that, that whole peer mentorship, those forms of a person seeing another human that went through the exact same thing, there's a sense of believability that changes the perception of the level of accountability or how to accept accountability. Oh, you went through it, I went through. Oh, that's what it takes to change. That kind of, and we do that in our work, is being able to have individuals talk to other individuals who've been through it. We do our intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and all that. We do all that kind of stuff. And then we do have guys come back to the class and talk to the class. It's those kinds of things where the believability, the authenticity of the words makes a difference many times. And when we can get committed individuals who are willing to kind of take that risk to kind of learn how to support others in stepping through understanding their own self and what happens